Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. It is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024, coming to you from the Daily Detroit studio at Techtown. I am Jer Stace, and across the table from me is none other than producer
Shianne.
Always good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Jer.
You know, it's amazing. People actually like it when you come out from behind the glass.
What can I say? I got quite the personality.
We've got a ton of stories for you from a new autonomous shuttle in the city that's coming this summer, plans for a new U of M medical facility in Troy on the old K-Mart site, and a lot more. By the way, we also saw the news on the new political maps in Metro Detroit. We're saving that for Norris Howard. Politics is kind of his thing, and because of the focus of why these maps were redrawn, I feel like Norris is the right guy to have this conversation with. As much as I have thoughts, I'm sure you have thoughts. We're going to save that for Norris for tomorrow.
I completely agree, yes.
And a little housekeeping. So, you know, and you're on the producer side. It's the end of Google Podcasts.
It is, unfortunately.
And we had hundreds of followers on Google Podcasts. So I feel really bad. I've actually helped more than a couple of handfuls of people land new podcast apps. If for some reason you're finding this and you used to use Google Podcasts, dailydetroit@gmail.com will help set you up with a new podcast app. YouTube Music is also apparently offering an option, but they do not transfer. So your previous subscriptions, according to Engineer Randy, do not transfer to the new thing, which is a bummer, to say the least, especially since it turns out we had all these people who were interested in the show from Google Podcasts.
Yeah. I don't understand.
It's Google. It's what they do. But what is your favorite podcast app? What's your daily driver?
My daily driver is Overcast.
Okay, same.
Yeah.
I feel like this is like the niche, like Overcast is what you use if you're the kind of guy who would like, if podcast gal that came out and podcasts were given to you on vinyl, right? If you're really into podcasts, Overcast on iOS is your way to go. On Android, I know a lot of people use Pocket Casts. And of course, some use Spotify. I mean, without a doubt, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
But the key with Spotify, and here's a pro tip for you. Hit that notification bell, because I feel like a YouTuber, but it kind of works like YouTube in that regard.
I have Spotify on my phone because I need to make sure that our show gets up and everything is good. But I am not a Spotify user. It's not my usual.
The hard thing with Spotify is that there seems to be some algorithm sauce in there. I've had listeners complain that like shows they follow fade away even though they keep posting, because unless you hit the bell,
right,
it doesn't notify you of new shows. It works a lot more like YouTube in that way. And people don't always consume podcasts the way they do YouTube videos. It's like a different thing. It's a much more personal relationship, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, enough about behind the scenes stuff. If you need anything, dailydetroit@gmail.com. Either I, Shianne, or Engineer Randy will help you out. Let's get into some stories. Detroit is launching a 10-mile autonomous vehicle shuttle route called the Connect. It's a collaborative effort between the city, Bedrock, Michigan Central, and the State Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. Slated for summer of 2024, it's backed by $1.5 million in funding and features 4 all-electric Ford E-Transit vehicles. Perrone Robotics is a preferred partner for the project. The Connect pilot aims to offer sustainable and efficient transportation, linking neighborhoods, transit routes, and economic hubs. This is all from a media release. The partners say it's another step forward for Detroit's commitment for future mobility innovation. This is part of the goal for Detroit to have a zero-emissions transportation system. The pilot route will run from Detroit's Corktown by Michigan Central Station, through downtown, past Campus Martius, and into the East Riverfront near Bedrock's recently purchased properties that used to house the training center for the UAW. So it's kind of a big loop. They say 10 miles, but really it's kind of like a big loop with some edits. We will put a map in the show notes so that you can see the details of where it's going to go. I feel like this is the beginning of the signs of like, hey, we're really going to try to make this autonomous stuff go. Now, this is going to have a driver in it, like a safety driver, but autonomous is like when you go behind the scenes. When I've been to events, I went to that downtown Detroit partnership thing about the future. You know what everyone was saying. They weren't saying about buses or trains. They're talking about autonomous.
Yeah. I think that this is a very interesting program that they're rolling out.
The vans hold like 10 people each. Yeah. There's going to be 4 vans.
And also it will be ADA accessible for people who are in wheelchairs. So it is an accessible option as well. And I think it's very interesting. You know, we've often talked about how the autonomous vehicles are going to be more for just shuttling people places, opposed to us sitting in a car driving in an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of criticism about this because it's not a bus or a train, but there is a challenge in greater downtown Detroit. If you've listened to the show, I've mentioned about how population density wise and population wise, Detroit's still kind of on the bottom of like cities for that. And without the density, it's harder to do some of those heavier things. And I wonder if like this is step one to something bigger. And I also think that there is a lot of political energy behind Autonomous to support the things that are grown here.
Yes. And also for the people who are like, I want rail immediately, it doesn't happen that way. The wheels and the cogs of public transportation take a very long time.
So here's the thing for me. $1.5 million isn't that much money.
It's not.
I mean,
It's not
it is.
at all.
It is. Like it is.
It is, but not in the grand scheme of things.
And if you can roll out something like this as a pilot and see if this works, this is the kind of thing that I could see routes like this off of, there's this idea that Detroit's going to really move some of their buses to a bus rapid transit system, like your key routes off of main areas. Well, could you do something with autonomous shuttles to make up the gap? Because that population density thing, I know other cities comparably across the entire city, the math can be comparable, but Detroit has large gaps.
We do.
Right? We have groupings and then we have gaps. And so you've got to mind the gap with that and get connected between key areas, and Autonomous might do that. Like you look at near where I live in the North End, that area between the North End and Highland Park, like there are blocks it just falls off where it's just empty until you hit the Grandies.
Yeah.
And when I say empty, there's a couple of houses, but like you can see that there was a neighborhood there, but there's 10 houses or something.
Yeah.
And so you have to deal with that topography differently. And I think Autonomous, especially for the level of demand, might be a good middle step. I'm interested to see what people have to say. dailydetroit@gmail.com. Let's go out to the suburbs. Urbanized Detroit reports that the University of Michigan plans to convert the former K-Mart headquarters in Troy into a new medical facility. This is part of the university's bid to increase its footprint in the region. The U of M Board of Regents has approved the purchase of the land, and construction is expected to begin next year with completion in 2027. The facility is expected to enhance access to multi-specialty and diagnostic services. Troy, this is going to be right next to Somerset, right off of Big Beaver, if you don't remember, because now we have a bunch of listeners who might not remember Kmart, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I'm excited that U of M is branching out for their medical services because there are a lot of people who utilize U of M who do live in Metro Detroit.
U of M does a series of things that only U of M does.
Right. And there are like specific things, like for instance, while we are at Children's, because I have a child that has multiple medical needs, it is also something where I might need services, and U of M is one of the places that I could receive services from. So I don't necessarily want to have to drive all the way to Ann Arbor for that. Yeah. Yeah, and it is easy to get in and out of. I don't always love Troy, but
You're not talking about the people.
not the people of Troy, but the
street.
the street grid of Troy. I don't necessarily love being there, but I am in Troy a lot because of my child. So I think it's a welcome thing to come.
That Kmart facility has been empty for years.
Years and years and years, yeah. And it has always been an eyesore since it closed.
Right. I mean, it's demoed now,
Yeah.
but it'll add some more workers. It'll help the restaurants out there
It'll create more
Employment.
density.
in Troy, of all places. All right. John Sinclair, the poet and activist known as the spiritual forefather of Michigan's marijuana movement, has passed away at the age of 82. This was on Tuesday. Sinclair was first to purchase recreational marijuana in Michigan in 2019. Now, the reason why is because he was a key player in the state's music scene, radical politics, just so many stories around John Sinclair over the years. He co-founded the White Panther Party and managed the MC5. He remained a committed poet, using his work to express his ideas, beliefs, often set to music. A true artistic man who inspired a lot of people, especially if you were into, marijuana and psychedelics and such. So, Shianne, I know that John Sinclair is close to your heart.
Yeah. recently when we lost Wayne Kramer, I thought about it and I said, gosh, John Sinclair is still alive. And, he was instrumental in the MC5 because he was their manager. And when you shared that with me, I was like, oh man, like
So the MC5 meant a lot to you.
Yeah. They're key in numerous genres of music. And I've always loved the MC5. And I think that they brought this sense of rebellion and just not giving a crap. And but also set it to music and just no rules. Right?
Isn't that rebellion kind of key to like the Detroit culture and the Detroit sound? Like,
absolutely.
So much of our work over the years, whether it was factory work or whatever, is all about following the rules. But once that clock punched out, it was like, we're going to do what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really an end of an era with the passing of John Sinclair.
Yeah, it's kind of this whole kind of cohort. And it's, I hope that people look back into Detroit history a little bit and see some of these things.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting stuff. John Sinclair was in some wild stuff.
Oh, yeah. And there was actually a really great interview that he did with Mark Maron years and years and years ago on Mark Maron's podcast, WTF.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I highly recommend seeking it out. I'm sure Mark will be resharing the interview now that he's passed.
Oh, and as producer, I'm sure you can make sure that's in the show notes.
I'm pretty sure I can find something.
It's like it's your job or something.
Right. Exactly.
Now, as far as non-wacky tobacco, Michigan is looking to crack down on the sale of tobacco products, focusing on flavored ones and e-cigarettes. The state Senate is considering a set of bills that would, for the first time, ban all sales of flavored tobacco. The legislation would also demand licensing for tobacco retailers and impose taxes on e-cigarettes and vapes containing nicotine. The move is in response to the increasing worry over youth addiction to flavored vapes in the state. The proposed laws aim to give counties more control over what tobacco products can be sold in their area. The move has support from the Michigan Municipal League, especially because of the importance of local control. I'm going to give the floor to you, Shianne, as the resident parent.
I know people are going to be like, I can't believe you're trying to squash people's right to ingest bad things into their bodies. I think this is a great thing. I think vapes, and we came about at a time when Camel cigarettes and Marlboro Man points and people were collecting all these points to try and get swag from tobacco companies, right? Like how many Camel. Yeah, and I think once they got rid of that and they put those regulations in to not allow tobacco companies to basically entice these young kids to smoke, then the vapes came about. And flavored tobacco and flavored products just sound, maybe it's because I have asthma and the thought of ingesting something like that makes the thought of me not being able to breathe. It doesn't sound fun to me, Jer.
I mean, I think some regulations are in order, but I also, there is this streak in me that's like, hey, if you're an adult, not a child, but if you're an adult, you should be able to do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting others.
Yeah.
And that's the thing for me. It's really hard for me on this stuff because I'm like, I do really think that if you want to screw yourself up in any way, that is your right to do so. It's just as long as it doesn't impact others. The question policy-wise becomes, so when does it impact others?
Yeah. I also have that same thing, right? Where it's personal freedom, but also betterment of the good.
But is this going to turn into something like marijuana where you have so many cities that are like, yeah, I'm for it. And then they're like, no, we don't want to sell it. Right? That dichotomy that is popped up all over Metro Detroit.
Yeah.
Where this idea that there was just going to be, in every community or whatever, that is just not the case. There's just been some highlighted places where most of the action happens. And then even places that people are for the consumption of it, they are against having it in their backyard.
Well, NIMBYism
it comes in many different forms.
It comes in all shades and all forms. So I think some regulation is needed. I think it'll be interesting to see exactly how it is implemented. And I do think that we need to curb, smoking and vaping with teenagers and children. It is a problem. And when you have something that tastes good and you're ingesting it,
If it tastes like bubble gum,
yeah, you're going to want to do it. I think if they do make these regulations, there are going to be a lot of angry people, though.
that is fair. Speaking of angry people, nothing gets people upset like an electricity rate hike. In a classic corporate versus consumer showdown, DTE Energy is seeking $456 million in rate hikes just months after getting approved for $368 million. So this process takes a while. So they say a month, but this is about year to year, right? These year to year increases. But Attorney General Dana Nessel is getting really upset about this, condemning DTE's request as, quote, absurd. DTE says the hike is necessary for infrastructure improvements, but Nessel argues that it's a financial windfall for corporate shareholders. This really highlights the ongoing tension between utility companies and customers because, look, we have a lot of issues with our utility grid. Some of them are about investment. Some of them are about the idea that we have a ever-growing area that we have to cover and people very far away from each other, but then less people to pay that bill. So it ends up getting spread across. It goes into that density issue. So, if a community isn't growing, the cost of everything goes up. So that cost is going to be shared across people. I mean, the hard part about this is what's the alternative? The alternative, is it municipally owned utilities? Is it some sort of quasi-governmental organization? The hard part about that is that bill is going to be expensive too. Is it going to be as expensive? I don't know. I would love to talk to some experts around this. I know that Ann Arbor is looking at municipalizing their power grid. Wyandotte, I believe, does, if I remember correctly. But it is something that I guess we could look at, but also it would take so much money to get those assets. Like the practical solutions around this aren't really great, because in general, we actually don't really like taxing ourselves for like this sort of thing. This is really painful. And I don't know if this is the right rate increase, but I also don't know if the alternatives are going to feel any better. Look, full disclosure, I lose power
So
twice a year
much
for multiple days.
More than twice a year, Jared.
Well, I'm saying for multiple days twice a year.
Yeah.
Like there's usually stretches of 3 to 5 days.
Yeah.
A couple of times every year that I lose power in Detroit.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that you lose power a lot more than you're saying you're losing power. And while
at random times, yeah.
Yeah, just at random times. But there are like times when you've lost power for multiple days.
I own a generator. I own a jackery. Like I am like at this point, I know that they kind of frown on solar panels, but I'm almost about to get solar panels for like my portable jackery, like a camping setup. So like we have missed so many episodes of the show before moving to the studio for not having power.
Yeah, because we just didn't have power. I hate the idea of another rate hike because they literally just did one.
And it squeezes people.
It does. I mean, everything is already costing a ton of money right now. We are all feeling this crunch. And to have like another rate increase on something that is a necessity, right? Like it's necessary to have power.
Yeah, this isn't a debatable bill.
No, it does make me think about people who are below poverty, who are really, really, really living paycheck to paycheck. And
well, it's hard too when you lose food.
Yeah, because you're losing. Yeah, exactly. Because if you lose power and then you just bought, and it always happens, right? You just went to the grocery store and you just stocked up and you spent $300,000 at the grocery store because that's how much food costs now. And then you lose power and then like all the food is spoiled. And you're like, well, what do I do now?
You get your $20 credit.
Ooh, $20 right now. That really is offensive to me.
I would love to talk to an expert about what's the alternative. Like, is there a better alternative to this way? Or like, what is the math underneath all of this? Because I hear a lot of people upset and I get it.
Yeah.
And it is a lot of money, right? And it is a lot of money for a lot of folks. But what's the real solution? Like, how do we actually get from here to there? Is there even one? I would love to know. And dailydetroit@gmail.com if you know somebody. And please, obviously, it needs to be a reasonable conversation.
Right.
But I just, it would be nice to see something. I mean, I feel like it's always going to be increasing every year.
I do think that as well, but what are they doing to better the infrastructure?
And they would argue a lot.
But if you're consistently losing power for days on end, in certain areas of everywhere.
I know I'm not the only one.
No. And my uncle over on the east side in Grosse Pointe lost power for like 5 days.
And he's a senior.
And he's a senior. And he's over there in like a little quad with like no air conditioning. It's hot. It was the middle of summer.
There is an argument to be made that if there isn't the service reliably there, should Wall Street get those profits?
Yeah.
So, love to hear what people think. dailydetroit@gmail.com. Shianne Osserini, always so good to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you too, Jer.
As always, thank you so much to our members on Patreon, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Very soon, we have our new website and relaunched newsletter coming to your inboxes very soon. We will put a little secret link in the show notes if you want to sign up for it.
Woo.
Get a little preview ahead of time. We're just waiting on the domain switch, and we will be rocking and rolling. So with that, I am Jer Stays.
And I'm Shianne Osserini.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.